Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions. The mystery of the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. On the morning of June 7, 1992, a young woman named Stacy McCall drove to the Springfield, Missouri home of her friend Suzie Streeter to collect some belongings after the two had spent graduation night apart. What she found when she arrived at 1717 East Delmar Street would become one of the most baffling and heartbreaking missing persons cases in American history. The house was empty. Suzie Streeter and her mother Sherrill Levitt, who owned the home, were gone. So was Suzie's friend Janelle Hoag, who had slept there after graduation. The doors were unlocked, the lights were on, the television was playing, cigarettes burned down to ash in the ashtrays. The dog was inside. 3 purses sat on the counter with wallets and keys inside. The cars were in the driveway. All 3 women had simply ceased to exist between approximately 2:00 a.m. and 8:00 a.m. on the night of June 6-7, 1992. The police response was initially confused. Early reports treated the disappearance as a voluntary departure, and full investigative resources were not deployed until hours had been lost. When investigators did arrive, they found an unusual amount of broken glass on the front porch from a shattered outdoor lamp, glass that had been swept into a pile but not removed, suggesting someone had tried to tidy up evidence of a struggle. The glass was collected but contaminated before it could be fully processed. Over the following weeks, investigators would discover that a convicted serial killer named Robert Craig Cox, who had boasted to a Florida cellmate that he knew where the Springfield Three were and that they would never be found alive, had been in the Springfield area at the time of the disappearance. Cox was interviewed by police and refused to reveal what he knew. He has maintained his silence for 32 years. No body has ever been recovered. No confirmed physical evidence linking any specific suspect to the disappearance has ever been processed. The case has generated more than 10,000 tips, has been featured on America's Most Wanted multiple times, and remains the defining unsolved case of Missouri law enforcement. Sherrill Levitt was 47 years old. Suzie Streeter was 19. Janelle Hoag was 19. 3 lives ended or erased on a graduation night, while a convicted killer with apparent knowledge sits in a Florida prison and says nothing. The question that has haunted Springfield for 32 years is not just what happened to 3 women in a house on Delmar Street. It is what kind of monster can watch a city mourn and stay silent. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. Every unsolved crime is a failure, not just of the investigation, but of memory itself. The witness who might have placed the suspect at the scene has died. The physical evidence has degraded or been lost in a storage room. The lead detective retired 30 years ago. The files exist, but the institutional knowledge that made them legible is gone. Cold cases are, in a very literal sense, history events that have receded from the living present into the documentary past, accessible now only through records, artifacts, and the unreliable memories of survivors. And yet cold cases do get solved. The history of forensic science is partly a history of cold case resolution. Cases that sat dormant for decades until a new technology, DNA profiling, digital facial recognition, isotope ratio analysis, genealogical databases, provided the key that previous generations lacked. The Golden State Killer was identified 50 years after his first known crime by genealogical DNA matching. Multiple historic murders have been solved through mitochondrial DNA extracted from hair samples thought to be too old and degraded to yield any useful information. The past is not as sealed as it seems. What cold cases teach us about crime is often as important as solving them. They expose the limitations of investigative practice at their time, the tunnel vision that focused on the wrong suspect, the forensic contamination that destroyed evidence, the jurisdictional rivalry that prevented agencies from sharing information. Examining cold cases is an act of institutional self-examination, an attempt to learn, across decades, from the failures that allowed the perpetrator to walk free. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Springfield Three disappeared between approximately 2:00 a.m. and 8:00 a.m. on June 7, 1992, from a residential property at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. The timeline is established by several factors. A neighbor reported seeing lights on and hearing the television at approximately 2:15 a.m., and Stacy McCall arrived to find the house empty at approximately 8:00 a.m. The 6-hour window is the entire known time frame for whatever happened. The absence of signs of struggle inside the house, no overturned furniture, no blood, no defensive marks, suggests either that the victims were surprised and overwhelmed very quickly, or that they were lured or coerced outside voluntarily. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the three women's ages and circumstances were Sherrill Levitt, 47, the homeowner, a hairdresser who had recently gone through a divorce; Suzie Streeter, 19, her daughter who had just graduated from Kickapoo High School; and Janelle Hoag, 19, Suzie's classmate, who had stayed overnight after the graduation celebration. The young women had originally planned to stay at a party at their friend Stacy McCall's house, but had decided to return to Suzie's home instead. This last-minute change of plans is significant because it means their specific location that night was not known in advance to anyone outside their immediate friend group. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this. And that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. Robert Craig Cox was convicted in 1990 of the kidnapping and murder of a young woman in Florida and was serving a prison sentence when the Springfield Three disappeared in 1992. He was out of prison briefly in 1992 on appeal. The conviction was overturned on a technicality, and he was later reconvicted. During his brief period of freedom, he was in the Springfield area and is documented to have visited the Battlefield Mall near where the Streeter home was located. A Florida cellmate reported Cox boasting that he knew where the Springfield Three were buried and that police would never find them. Cox has been questioned by Springfield police multiple times and has consistently refused to provide any information. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the physical evidence collected from the scene was limited and poorly handled by the standards of modern forensic investigation. The broken glass swept into a pile on the front porch was the most significant anomalous feature. The sweeping suggested someone had attempted to conceal or reduce evidence of a forced entry or struggle. DNA analysis was not available in practical form for criminal investigations in 1992, and much of the physical material from the scene was not preserved in a way that would permit later analysis. Subsequent review of the investigation by the FBI and private investigators has identified multiple failures in the initial response, including failure to immediately treat the scene as a crime scene. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of. The case generated a landmark legal battle in Missouri regarding the rights of crime victims' families to access investigative records. Sherrill Pomeroy, Janelle Hoag's mother, filed multiple requests under Missouri's Sunshine Law for access to the investigative files and was repeatedly denied by Springfield police on grounds that releasing the records might compromise an ongoing investigation. The denial of records access became itself a secondary controversy, with critics arguing that the real reason for secrecy was concealment of investigative failures. After 25 years, some records were eventually released and confirmed that several promising leads had been inadequately followed up in the 1990s. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. The Springfield Three case attracted significant attention in the true crime community in the 2010s and 2020, with multiple podcasts, documentary features, and investigative journalism projects examining the case with fresh eyes. An investigative series by the Springfield News Leader, published in 2017, reviewed the case files and identified Robert Craig Cox as the most significant unaddressed suspect, while also raising questions about whether a second person might have been involved. DNA technology has advanced dramatically since 1992, and investigators have periodically stated that if physical evidence linked to the scene could be identified and tested, a solution might be possible. But 3 decades of chain of custody issues make the original evidence increasingly problematic. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, The alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the single predator theory holds that one individual, most likely Robert Craig Cox, abducted all 3 women in a single rapid operation on the night of June 6-7, 1992. Proponents argue that Cox's presence in Springfield, his documented criminal history of kidnapping and murder, and his direct statements to a cellmate about knowing the women's location are sufficient to establish his involvement. Critics note that no physical evidence links Cox to the Streeter home, that Cox has never been charged despite being questioned multiple times, and that his cellmate's statements may have been boasting rather than admission. The single predator theory requires believing that one person controlled 3 women simultaneously. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the 2-person operation theory, favored by some investigators and true crime researchers, proposes that the abduction required at least 2 individuals, one to control or distract the women, while another managed the logistics of removing 3 people from a house. This theory is supported by the practical difficulty of one person simultaneously controlling 3 adults without any apparent noise or struggle that would have alerted neighbors. Under this model, Cox may have been the primary suspect with an unidentified accomplice, or Cox may have been one of 2 or more individuals who together abducted the women. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the known acquaintance theory proposes that the perpetrator was known to the victims, which explains the absence of signs of forced entry and the apparent lack of defensive struggle inside the house. If someone the women knew and trusted arrived at the door between 2 and 8 a.m., they might have opened the door voluntarily and been lured outside without raising alarm. This theory is consistent with the evidence, but does not identify a specific suspect beyond Cox, whose connection to the victims is unclear. The Streeter and Hoag families have indicated that they do not believe any known person in their social circle was responsible. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the broken glass swept into a pile on the front porch is the most physically significant evidence from the scene. The lamp above the front door was shattered, and the glass had been swept to one side, an action that implies deliberate cleanup by someone at the scene after the breakage occurred. If the lamp broke during a struggle near the front door, the sweeping would suggest the perpetrator had the presence of mind to partially clean up before leaving. Alternatively, if someone staged the scene after the fact, the sweeping might indicate an attempt to remove evidence of the entry point. The glass was collected, but its evidentiary value was compromised by handling. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented Cox's statements to his Florida cellmate, first reported by Springfield investigators in the mid-1990s, represent the most direct evidence connecting a specific individual to Noel, DGE of the case. The cellmate's account, which was corroborated by a second witness who separately heard Cox make similar statements, describes Cox saying that the women were dead and that their bodies were in a location that police would never find. Cox has denied making these statements in subsequent interviews, while also refusing to provide any alibi information for his whereabouts on the night of June 6-7, 1992. His refusal to cooperate with investigators over 30 years is itself a data point, though not legally actionable. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the circumstantial evidence of the three women's purses, wallets, keys, and cars remaining at the house, while the women themselves disappeared, is the most powerful indicator that they did not leave voluntarily. There is no scenario consistent with a voluntary departure in which three adult women, one of them the homeowner, would leave behind their identification, money, car keys, and vehicles. The voluntary departure theory was briefly entertained by early investigators due to the absence of visible struggle evidence, but has been abandoned. The evidence firmly establishes that the women were taken, not that they left, which means someone came to that house and removed them. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Springfield Three case remains officially open. The Springfield Police Department has a dedicated cold case unit that periodically revisits the evidence, and the case is reviewed whenever new forensic techniques become available. DNA genealogy technology, which solved the Golden State Killer case in 2018, has been identified as a potential tool if biological material from the scene can be located and processed. In 2021, a private investigation firm contracted by the families conducted a review of the case files and submitted a report to Springfield Police identifying several investigative avenues they believed had been inadequately pursued. The report's contents have not been made public. Robert Craig Cox, now in his 60s, remains the primary focus of investigative interest. He has been re-interviewed by Springfield detectives multiple times since the 1990s and has consistently declined to provide any information. His lawyers have argued that he has no legal obligation to speak. Absent new physical evidence or a change in Cox's posture, the investigative options are limited. The families of the three women, now decades older, some deceased, have never given up advocacy for the case. The Springfield community continues to observe the anniversary of the disappearance each June, and local media regularly revisit the case. Three women disappeared in Springfield, Missouri, on a graduation night in 1992. 32 years later, no one has been held accountable and no remains have been recovered. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Springfield Three women vanished from a single house in 1992 without a trace. From the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Springfield Three ultimately reveals is not just a historic puzzle, it is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.